It is time to bring in David Tereshchuk. It's time for the Media Beat. David joins us on a Friday morning. We were broadcasted over the weekend and also after our 12 noon news here on Robin Hood Radio. David is a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. He is also got his own website called themediabeat.us, and we are privileged to have him join us and talk about the media and media coverage every Friday. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining us once again today.
Glad to do so from the media capital of the world, New York City, where I look out from my window on 8 inches of snow. Now, you're going to tell me how much snow you've got in the northwest corner of Connecticut, and I'm sure it will be more than that.
It's more than that anyway. It depends on where you are, but like at my house, it's anywhere from 18 to 20 inches. But if you're a higher elevation, you might have gotten 22, 23, close to 2 feet. It's just... you know what? It's a pain in the ass.
Oh, it's so pretty, but it's a pain in the ass.
I mean, I'm not gonna change that at all, because it's just the way it is. It looks great, and we should expect it. But this is a hell of a way to start off the winter. I mean, we've had, I think, about maybe 2 or 3 inches, maybe 4 inches of snow off and on. But to start it off with a bang with almost 2 feet of snow is amazing. But New York City is always amazing in the snow. I know people who don't live there don't understand, but one of the things I always loved about going into the city is that even at night it's day. No, it truly is. If you in most areas of New York, and in the wintertime, there's a certain quiet and calmness that is added to that fact that it's lit up in New York City.
Yeah, the extraordinary thing about my working yesterday is, of course, a lot of my work is accompanied. You don't hear it because we take special measures, but it's accompanied a lot by construction noise, by traffic noise, by sirens noise. And yesterday, as I tapped at my quiet computer, it was all quiet outside too. It was a little spooky. And of course, it's amplified by COVID too. Movement around the city is especially those parts of the city where you expect and have gotten used to a lot of movement, is now much reduced. If you go to Times Square now, it's especially eerie because no tourists. Massive change.
All right.
So one more. I mean, the snowy weather has just added one more peculiar kind of spookiness to what's been a spooky year all around.
Well, we'll get to the spookiness that's going on in Washington, D.C. in just a moment. But before that,
yes, the spooky capital.
Yeah, I want to get your opinion on a couple of different things. First of all, this hack that took place and has affected over 18,000 businesses, and the way that the hack was put into effect was this is supposed the Russians hacked into a software company that supplied security software to all these businesses and the government, successfully hacked into that, and now there's a growing problem. What's your take on this? I mean, the White House is always quiet on things that involve Russia, but this is really a serious breach. Every country spies on one another, but a hack this size is unprecedented.
Yeah, well, we've known about we've known in general terms, at least, about Russian hacking attempts and some successful intrusions over the last few years, and no one's surprised by this. I don't think, that though the scale of this one and the sensitivity of the areas that managed to be probed. To what end? We don't know, of course. For the obvious security reasons, we're told, at least. For obvious security reasons, we're not actually being told what its effect may have been. The official line is that it's not known whether this was actual. Whether this ended up revealing actual state secrets to a foreign entity, or whether any real damage was done. One of the central questions, of course, was it espionage or sabotage? And of course, it could have been a bit of both. And of course, we certainly don't know. As a public, we don't know. Maybe the security agencies know, and if they know, they're not telling us. But it's excuse me, it's an illustration of our extraordinary vulnerability. And we should not be surprised, I guess. It's been warnings have been given for a long time, and especially about the very highly organized and our country's media, the better parts of it, and the ones with the resources to do this kind of work, have been revealing the work of the Russians, especially the research, so-called research arm, nice little euphemism the Russians use for the military intelligence unit, which is dedicated to this work, and we've known a lot because of very assiduous journalism, how it goes on, where it goes on from, and of course a general idea of what their targets have been in the United States. This latest example should be giving us great concern. The main thing is that it's been it seems most concerning that it should have gotten into. They should have gotten into institutions of government. But the interesting thing is, and the disturbing question still remains: how ready and how easy will they find it to get into our infrastructure systems, our power supply, for instance? It's an alarming thought. If they can get into the Department of Commerce, can they not get into a grid supplying electrical power to our cities? I suspect that they quite easily can, though, of course, I'm no expert.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because the Department of Energy, which also handles nuclear, was one of those places hacked. Most of the documents that have been hacked were not high risk documents, high security documents, but still.
That's what we're told.
Yeah, that's all. That's exactly right. I mean, but I guess it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander, because we're involved in stuff like this as well as a country with our. But I don't know whether or not we just wield the hacking ability as wildly as some of the other countries which are under such tight control. I mean, obviously we do hacking to protect ourselves, but I don't know whether or not hacking as an offensive measure like North Korea or China or even Iran is a different case.
Yeah, what's particularly disturbing, of course, is that given the way the story came out, it seems like it's been this particular surge of intrusive effort. It was going on back in March of this year, and we only learn of it now. It was mainly drawn to the authorities' attention by a private company specializing in cybersecurity. So it's disturbing. It suggests that we weren't watching our institutions, our government institutions, weren't watching carefully enough. And that's disturbing. No matter how much our counter espionage work might be working, and no matter how much we might be probing the people at the other end of this operation overseas, but if we ourselves are not sharp enough to catch it ourselves and have to rely, as a government, and have to rely on the off chance of a commercial company spotting the problem, then our security doesn't sound so secure, does it?
Yeah, that was the thing that also amazed me. You're right. I didn't bring that up, and I should have brought that up. Is that yes, it wasn't even the initial break was not even recognized by our government, but it was noticed by the private vendor, which supplied security software to our government. So that is, you're right. That is something that is even more doubly concerning. You're right. Not that it was found out. That's concerning enough, but that the fact that the government found out third hand. That's the scary thing about that. Let's move on, and it does tie in. The Congress, the House, the Senate, all wrapped up, trying to get a package put together to help citizens continue on because of COVID-19. The president basically absent from that, and the president basically absent from even commenting on what happened with the hack and other things. It is almost like we're a little bit rudderless because the Senate and the House can't get together, and the president's just not interacting. And he holds a cabinet meeting, and most of the cabinet members don't show up because either they got COVID-19, they got to be compliant, or else they weren't asked to show up, and it was a closed meeting. I mean, it appears...
Or else they've been fired and haven't been replaced.
It's one of those things...
or even resigned and not been replaced, accepted by, an acting substitute for the last few dwindling days of this administration.
Well, and it almost appears, and this is why you would think a hack like this is so important, is that it almost appears that between the House and the Senate haggling over what they're doing and the president being so removed that we appear to be easy targets because we're so disjointed right now.
Well, yeah, that's been the concern in more general terms about the very well, what's the best word for it? I was going to use the sloppy word sloppy, but what's going on, of course, is a transition which is not being handled in anything remotely like the efficient way that we see every 4 or 8 years a transition take place between one administration and another. And we know why that transition is not taking place, because the childish stupidity from the top of the outgoing administration has not been allowing it until very late in the game. And the fears expressed over these weeks has been, of course, that doesn't such a improperly or insufficiently conducted process of transition, does that not contribute to a great kind of vulnerability to our government at this time, vulnerable to all kinds of mischief from the rest of the world who might be, favor, or rather not favor us, but very much the opposite, would want to take this opportunity to do us down in some way. And here we are, nothing to do with the governmental process particularly, just plain old-fashioned espionage of the electronic kind, reveals exactly how vulnerable we are, and who knows what else may be going on, what kind of plans people may have been. I don't want to get into a sinister mode here and a conspiracy theory kind of mode of thinking, but it's hard not to feel concerned for the security of our country when everyone seems absent from the wheel, and we've got what is it now? Only till January 20th before a new team takes charge. But how much weakening has been taking place in the sinews of government during this strange, as you say, somewhat spooky time when no one seems to be in charge.
And it appears now that the president is going to get enough Congress members, or maybe one senator, to force this whole election thing for the House and the Senate to decide. And of course, once the House decides against it, it's over, because you need both the House and the Senate to overturn an election. But just the feeble attempt of going through with this and possibly getting people on board, I think sooner or later, so somewhere down the road, the representatives that have backed this right to the hilt will find themselves in trouble, because people will see when the new administration comes in exactly how far behind the 8 ball we are.
Yeah, I think we're going to learn. And although, of course, the new Biden administration won't be particularly eager to show how much behind the 8 ball we've been, it'll become clear, I think, and inevitably they won't be above scoring some political points at the outgoing Trump mess of an administration. and pointing out that, and will point out, of course, how much of it is not their own fault, of course, but the fault of the crazy would-be autocrat who has now left office.
And then it's hard to believe that this would be number 5 on my list today, but there's just so much for the media. For the media to cover itself is, once again, even though we have one vaccine that's out, another one coming out, the crisis is amazing, where 3,500 people died in the U.S. yesterday. That is now, I think, 6 or 7 days in a row where it's over 3,000 deaths a day. And even though there is light at the tunnel, and God bless, it's not often I will God bless the pharmaceutical companies because
yes, absolutely.
But really what they did in record time is absolutely amazing, and it will make a difference. But unfortunately, to the people that have lost their jobs, and by the way, unemployment once again was up again in the report yesterday. To people that lost their jobs and people that lost their lives and families that have lost loved ones, really, it looks like we've got at least another 2.5, 3 months of some very, very tough times ahead of us.
Yes, and meanwhile, the overall death total keeps on rapidly shooting upwards. Given the length of time that it is inevitably going to take before the vaccination process can make any real substantial inroads into it overall, I'm afraid we can probably see that appalling death total for our country, the world leader in this, I'm afraid to say, will be coming to the 500,000 mark. We're already at 370-something thousand deaths, and it's almost inevitable, I fear, that we will hit that 500,000 mark before the corner is really turned. It's a phrase I hate to hear because it echoes so clearly what the ridiculous notion promulgated by the outgoing chief executive tried to claim, that we were already turning the corner. Do you remember that? In the fall of 2020, and was just living in cloud cuckoo land. And now, the gravity of the reality is become very clear, and we are dealing with one of the greatest public health crises the world has ever seen. And this country, we cannot be proud of this, is the worst affected, the most powerful country in the world in some senses, and yet, here we are. Largely because of gross mismanagement, we are now the world leader in disaster.
I talked about things like this with Brian Ross. What we don't even talk about, and you'll have a better understanding because you have more of a worldview than most people, simply where your career has taken you, and you look at the countries that are going to be left at the tail end of this, the poorer countries in this world. They're not even part of the initial rollout of the vaccinations across the world, and that just explains a whole lot. That there's just a lot that's wrong.
Sure, and as you know, much of my career is spent in Africa, and of course, while the highly developed nations, the economically highly developed nations and industrialized nations of the world are racing now in the vaccination game, it's turned, of course, into a kind of a competition. Guess who's left waiting? It is countries, of course, in the continent of Africa, and there's nothing new about that. That's how things have gone for that part of the world for 100 years or more. Ever since the bipolarity of the world was set up by colonialism on the part of that industrialized world. But it's an illustration of that old phrase from Victorian novelist in Britain, the way the world is, and the message has been repeated that this is the way the world is again and again by the COVID experience internally in this country, again the richest in the world. It's been revealed more clearly than ever before, I think, what kind of inequalities exist here. The way that COVID has been so acutely more serious in minority communities, and of course how the resulting economic crisis that has come from it has emphasized that inequality too, and that the crisis is being suffered very unequally and much more by minority communities, and yet again, the message comes through that however prosperous we may be, we are a society built on great inequalities.
And what's interesting is everybody, over the past 20 years, of course, this world has become a global economy, more of a global nation, and you would have thought that in that process of the world becoming smaller and more countries involved, that the extent to which poor countries are basically left off the list, even though nobody will say it that way, it amazes me, because just about on every other plateau, business, finance, you name it, the global economy recognizes just about everybody, but poor people, and just seems to get the short shrift no matter what. And that leads to a problem even in this country of who trusts the vaccinations as well. You know what I mean? That's another problem. People have to take the vaccine for it to be effective.
Well, sure, and the people can't be blamed, I don't think, for feeling skeptical about it, especially the speed at which it's happened. I mean, you said that you found yourself admiring the pharmaceutical industry, as kind of a rare occasion. But it's hard not to have our suspicions, and the inevitable thought comes up is that if the pharmaceutical industry can perform this miracle now, how come we had to wait so long for other things to happen? Other pieces of public health action that still are lingering, and one of the truths that we have to face is that when the political will is there, as it was in this case, and huge government resources were handed over to the pharmaceutical industry in the promise that they would do their public duty, they only really did so because the sheer dollar amounts were so massive, and the public pressure, of course, was so severe too. The desire for it all to happen at so-called warp speed. But it's interesting that these kind of advances only happen when real crises hit, and they hit the powerful as well as the powerless. When it's disease, for instance, that is rampant, but only among poor people, very little research is being done about that, and vaccines and cures are not being rushed out by the pharmaceutical companies, and because as we know, also there's very little profit in that kind of drug making.
All right, and
I hate to sound cynical, but that's and by the way, what you said, that you would have thought things would be better. I recall that was one of the phrases I was taught early on in my journalism, and especially in covering in conducting journalism about the third world. That phrase, "you would have thought," has to be banned. It's just not part of the vocabulary of coverage of matters when it comes to the poor sectors of our society, the way that they are treated. You would have thought we would do better, especially if we're if we claim to be the powerful nation that we are. And yet, of course, we don't do better. We only do better when we are forced to by our own self-interest.
And how's New York City going to look on New Year's Eve when people are going to be... You think people will actually stay away from Times Square, or do you think they'll show up anyway?
It's hard to tell. It's such a peculiar ritual. I've never understood it in the first
Neither
place.
have I.
But people are very wedded to their rituals. I was listening to Irish radio yesterday, where there's desperate concern about Christmas not being Christmas because of COVID restrictions. And of course, for Ireland, family reunions are an essential part of family life every year. And it's remarkable. People can't seem to get into their heads that this is a really, really serious, deadly crisis. And surely we can miss one holiday 1 year in order to keep our nations safe.
Well said, David, and we'll I guess check in with you again next week.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.
Take care. David Tereshchuk with the Media Beat here on Robin Hood Radio. You can find him at robinhoodradio.com. Click on David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat.